All right, let's just dive straight into this. Welcome to the Explainer, everyone. Consider today your high-energy esports boot camp. Look, if you're a beginner jumping into Rust, you are probably struggling with a game that feels, well, laggy, kind of clunky, and honestly just visually overwhelming. There's way too much going on screen. Well, we're going to fix that right now. Today, we are taking your settings from cinematic clutter to absolute competitive clarity. We are completely optimizing your in-game setup for maximum tactical advantage so you can stop fighting your computer and actually start winning your PvP fights. Let's get geared up.
Here is our agenda for the explainer. 1. The CPU and GPU balance. 2. Graphics for tactical advantage. 3. Rendering for zero lag. 4. World visibility sweet spots. And finally, 5. Textures and secret sauce.
Section 1. The CPU and GPU balance. Okay, so before we click a single button in that menu, you absolutely have to know this. Rust is incredibly CPU bound. What does that actually mean for you? Well, it means the game's performance is basically bottlenecked by your processor, not your graphics card. In gamer terms, it's demanding massive raw calculating power from your CPU just to figure out where all the giant clan bases, the players, and the dropped items actually are in the world. And because of this, beginners tend to make one really catastrophic mistake when they're chasing better frame rates. They just assume they should lower every single setting to 0. But trust me, you cannot do that. It leads us right to this golden rule. If you turn everything to 0, you are actually hurting your FPS. I know, no way, right? It sounds totally backwards. But here's the logic behind it. When you drop every single visual setting to the absolute bare minimum, your graphics card essentially goes to sleep. It just stops working. And guess what happens next? It forces your already overworked CPU to do absolutely everything. You literally bottleneck your own system. So we actually have to keep certain settings cranked up just to force the GPU to pull its own weight.
Section 2. Graphics for tactical advantage.
Now we're getting to the good stuff. These specific numbers will literally change the way you play. For graphics quality, you're going to want 3 or 4 if you're on a high-end PC, or drop it to a 2 for low-end. But pay close attention to shadow quality. Set this to medium, or 1 if you're using the older UI. Why? Because medium gives you the massive tactical advantage of seeing an enemy player's shadow stretching around a corner before they even peek, but without crushing your GPU like higher cascaded shadows do. Next up, max tree meshes. Put this at 100. This is a huge CPU lifesaver because it tells the game to stop rendering complex 3D trees miles in the distance and just replaces them with flat 2D billboard images. Finally, object quality. Leave this at 100. This is absolutely crucial so that enemy bases and deployables don't just magically pop into existence right in front of your face while you're running around scouting. If you're on a true potato PC, yeah, you can drop this to 50, but just know you're going to suffer a bit in PvP. Okay, so the real spotlight here is what I call the zeros. You need to set your decor, grass, terrain, and particle settings all the way down to a flat 0. Seriously, I cannot emphasize this enough for your setup. These settings, they are nothing but visual clutter. By turning all this fluff off, it becomes infinitely easier to spot a dropped gun sitting on the ground during a crazy chaotic firefight, or to instantly pinpoint that sneaky player who really thinks they're totally hidden inside a bush. This right here is pure competitive visibility.
Section 3. Rendering for zero lag.
Jumping over to the rendering tab, this is all about killing latency. First up is render scale. Set this to exactly 1.0. Honestly, never ever touch this unless you are truly desperate. If your GPU is super ancient, okay, you can lower it to 0.8, but consider yourself warned, your game is going to look incredibly blurry, making it super hard to spot distant enemies. But the absolute 100% non-negotiable setting on this page is NVIDIA Reflex Mode. Set this to On plus Boost. What this bad boy does is physically force your CPU and your GPU to stay perfectly synced up. It drastically cuts down input lag, meaning the exact millisecond you click your mouse, your gun actually fires on screen. Next, we've got to talk about NVIDIA DLSS. This setting completely depends on your specific hardware tier. If you have an RTX 4070 or anything higher, keep DLSS completely off. You want the absolute clearest native image possible so you can spot enemy hazmat suits running on the horizon. However, if you're rocking more of a mid-range card, think an RTX 2060 or a 3060, turn DLSS to balanced or quality. That is going to give you a massive injection of basically free frames, which is vital for smooth tracking when you're actually aiming at someone. So prioritize clarity if you have the horsepower, but prioritize free frames if you need that smoothness. Section 4. World visibility sweet spots. 1700. Just go ahead and write this number down. This is the completely unmissable draw distance sweet spot. At exactly 1700, you have the visual range you need to spot attack helicopters roaming the map or see an airdrop falling from the sky from way off. But crucially, your CPU isn't totally panicking trying to render the entire island all at once. Now, if you are on a lower-end rig, you should probably dial this down to about 1,000, but 1700 is the gold standard for pros. Oh, and while we're poking around in the World tab, water quality and reflections, they go straight to 0. Listen, unless you are actively directing a cinematic movie, you really do not need the ocean to sparkle for you. Water reflections will absolutely tank your frames, especially when you're caught in a high-stakes boat fight. Zero these out to guarantee that a massive frame drop doesn't get you killed while you're out on the open water. Section 5. Textures and secret sauce. For the finishing touches, let's look at textures. Now, this is entirely dependent on your graphics card's VRAM, your video RAM. If your GPU has 8 GB of VRAM or more, push your texture quality all the way to full resolution. But if you're playing on a card with maybe 4 to 6 gigs, something like a GTX 1060 or a 1650, you must drop this to half. If you don't, your game is going to stutter wildly every single time you load into a new monument. Also, make sure you set anisotropic filtering to 8 or 16. That makes textures look incredibly sharp when you're looking at them from an angle, and it costs modern GPUs practically zero performance. It's basically a free upgrade for extra visual clarity. All right, time for the experimental tab. This is where the secret sauce lives. Set automatic processor affinity to on. This lets the game automatically manage which CPU cores it uses. And if you're running a Ryzen processor, this is huge. It really helps balance the load and actively reduces how hot your processor gets. Next is your GC buffer, which handles garbage collection for the game's memory. Push the slider up to 4096. However, little caveat here, if your system only has 16 gigabytes of total RAM, keep this slider at 2048. That'll prevent memory leaks and keep your game from crashing during those long, late-night wipes. So let's bring this all together into one big strategy no matter what you're playing on. Here is your master cheat sheet. That baseline competitive sweet spot like the one I run on my 5800X3D and RTX 4070 to get over 160 frames per second is that top row right there. High-end, 1700 draw distance, 100 object quality, full textures, and DLSS completely off. But look at the mid-range, say a Ryzen 3600 paired with a 3060, you drop draw distance just a bit to 1500 and flip DLSS to quality. And for the low end, you pull back to 1000 draw distance, 50 for object quality, and half textures. By actively adapting to your specific rig, you are guaranteeing the absolute best visual clarity for spotting enemy gear without sacrificing a single frame. Definitely take a screenshot of this cheat sheet if you need it. And there we go. We've completely eliminated the cinematic clutter. We've perfectly balanced your CPU and GPU, we've dialed in your draw distance, and slashed your input lag. Your system is now a finely tuned machine, specifically built to spot enemies, track targets, and run super smooth under pressure. But that does leave us with one final, incredibly important question as we wrap up this explainer. Your settings are perfectly optimized, but is your aim actually ready for the wipe? It's time to get out there, put these new frames to the test, and absolutely dominate your next PvP encounter. Thanks for hanging out and learning with me today, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.